everybody, I'm Nicole Vulcan, editor of The Source Weekly, and I'm here with a
Donavan
city
Jividen.
council member, or city council candidate.
Yes.
So why don't you introduce yourself and tell people why you're running.
I'm Donavan Jividen. I'm a longtime Bend resident. I was born in Bend. I've grown up in Bend, been through the schooling system, seen what Bend has to offer as a resident and as someone who's grown up in this community. Having worked here, I want to be able to give back and represent the working people that live in Bend. I want to make sure that people that work in Bend can live in Bend, and that's the core focus of my campaign, is making sure that the people that live here are able to live here comfortably and safely.
Thanks. So obviously we're doing this interview in the middle of a global pandemic.
Yes.
We're taking some extra measures in regard to that. But I'm curious, in your perspective, looking from the outside in at the Bend City Council, how has that role of city councilor changed during this pandemic?
The remote nature, I think, has opened up some more accessibility options because people don't have to go to the actual city council to make themselves heard as much, and they can. But at the same time, I think it's distanced people because now you can't exactly go out into the community and see what those people are doing. You've got to do it remotely, and while that does provide some benefits, it's definitely changed the role in. It's less personal and face-to-face, even when you are in a video call. It's more difficult to reach out and actually get those strong community ties that you need as a city council member.
Mm-hmm, definitely. What, in your mind, does leadership look like for a city councilor in Bend today?
I think that leadership for a city councilor means that they're going out and finding what needs to be done. They're not just waiting for people to come and raise an issue with them. They're going out and contacting those community members and saying, what do you need? What can I do to make sure that you're represented at the city level? I've seen a lot of people that are very unhappy with the current councilors because it seems like they're not getting out into the community. There were, in the last city council meeting yesterday, there were plenty of calls that were just essentially saying the mayor was not in the community, was not representing the community that she says she is. And I think we need people that are actually going out there and saying, what do you need, as opposed to waiting for negative feedback to come in. And I want to be active in accomplishing that.
Thanks. So we'll get a little bit more into that, some nuance of that question in a moment. But I'm just going to go down the line. So our questions were assembled by our editorial board, so a number of members who will collectively endorse certain, whatever candidates we decide. So I want to be fair and ask the questions in the same order for everybody that we meet with. So tourism is a big
Yes.
economic driver for the city of Bend. What, in your mind, should the city's position on tourism be as the pandemic appears to be stretching into 2021?
I understand that tourism is definitely a big portion of our economy. That's why I want to encourage and work with local business owners to establish economic drivers that aren't directly tied to tourism. Because as this pandemic has highlighted, if tourism is interrupted, our entire economy comes to a screeching halt. If we don't have people that are coming in here and spending money, we don't have much outside of that currently to keep our economy running and keeping people employed. The same goes for the service industry. We need to expand that, but I think that personally, they did not do enough quickly enough to prevent this. They did put out an order eventually that was saying to not come to Bend and revising that was not the best course of action. But I don't think they did that quickly enough, and if they had done that quickly enough, we would have been able to properly prepare and make sure that these people stay employed, find other employment opportunities for people that weren't directly tied to that.
Mm-hmm. What do you believe can be done at the local level to fuel Bend's economy and start to recover from this recession we find ourselves in?
I think more broad zoning changes to actually accommodate more non-tourism related jobs. The Juniper Ridge, from my understanding, was originally intended to accommodate more manufacturing and industrial jobs, which would not be directly tied to the tourism and service industries. But I don't think the city adequately incentivized development there in the capacity that Bend needed. I think if we expanded the zoning that was there and into more broad and made it more appealing to people to actually establish new businesses, I think we could have mitigated some of the effects we are currently seeing if we actually had a stable base of non-tourism employment.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to speak at all about your personal experience or your personal career and how that might play into that conversation?
So I personally, during high school, I was working as a service worker here, and so I've experienced what it is like to work as a service worker here. I understand like how much of that, just even as someone who's just a high school teenager working at a pizza shop, how many of those people were just tourists that were coming in here, and how much of an economic driver that is, especially in the service industry. Pretty much all of the stuff that we currently have, except for in a very few rare cases, is tied directly to that tourism industry and lives and dies on the whims of tourists coming here. Mm-hmm. Now, personally, I think from what I've seen, as I'm now working in the tech sector, if we could expand stuff like that and bring more of those jobs here, currently that seems to be occurring with a lot of that, which is kind of also impacting our housing situation. But if we can incentivize that in a way that doesn't negatively impact the people who are already living here, I think expanding in some of those areas might also help Bend's economy, bring more money here and less of it flowing out.
Great. So last night, or actually 2 weeks ago, the
Yes.
Bend City Council voted to put the transportation bond onto the ballot in November,
Mm-hmm.
same ballot upon which people will be voting on this race.
Yes.
I'd like to know your position on that decision to put it on the ballot this fall, and as well as your position on the specifics of the bond.
I think that it was good to put it on the ballot. I do think that the economic indicator an economic indicator on there is a beneficial thing, because if that will actually tie it to our economy. I know some of the people in the council were opposed to that, saying it might be a bit too complex for voters, which I find a bit condescending to our voters. But I think while it's not a perfect bond, I think making sure and preparing for once this is over, and making sure that when that happens, we are ready to actually improve our transportation stuff. Even if it's not perfect, I think it's a necessary thing to bring up now, because by the time that it's actually implemented and ironed out, then this most likely will only be seeing the impacts. We won't be in the midst of it.
Mm-hmm. What specifically, you mentioned not being a perfect bond. Are there specifics
Yes.
that you have in mind about
Ariel Mendez has spoken a lot on this, and I personally agree with a lot of the things he said. It seems to be a bond that mainly focuses on a lot of car-centric transportation modes and kind of kicking the can down the road, literally, for a lot of the current issues we're facing. And I think if it was more focused on public transit and walking and biking, I think that would be a better fit for where I think Bend's going to be in the future. Because we've tried many car-centric transportation options, and it's been much of the same that we've experienced previously. It's just slightly shifting where the actual pressure is, not resolving the issue.
Mm-hmm. So we're just flying through the questions here. Going to move on to a different topic.
Okay.
What's your assessment of the city and the city police's handling of the recent ICE incident in Bend, and specifically, do you believe it was appropriately handled by the city and city police?
As someone who showed up there, I have some strong opinions on that. I don't think that they did say that they were there to protect the people there, but it did not seem that was the case. It seemed that they were more in support of the people who were removing the suspects in this case, and I think that the city also didn't help that. Specifically, the mayor's response was somewhat controversial. I don't think they handled it as well as they could have, especially bringing riot police to something that was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration off the bat. That was, speaking as someone who was there, that did not aid in the mood at the time. A lot of people became agitated and fearful, and I don't think that's an appropriate response to a peaceful First Amendment demonstration.
If you were a Bend City Councilor last Wednesday when that happened, what would have been your approach on the scene?
I would have tried my best to assuage the protesters' fears of the police, try and work with the police to keep their presence there as passive as possible, because this was mainly a clash between the protesters there and the federal agents, and as Bend is a sanctuary city, they're not supposed to aid them. From what I've seen, they did aid them in some capacity. While it was minor, I believe that might still go against some of the things that are legally mandated for them not to do. But I personally would have stood with the protesters. I know our DA stood with the protesters in the capacity of demonstrating their First Amendment rights.
Thanks. Do you feel like the city overall is doing enough to support diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if not, what would you do?
I think the establishment of the Human Rights and Equity Commission that they're working on currently is a step in the right direction. I'm totally behind Riedel Schinkelberg becoming a councilor, because that's great representation of diversity on our city council, which will, again, provide a unique perspective to the council that is not currently on there. And I think that yes, while there is some things that they could do, personally, I think the city's page could be available in Spanish, because a large percentage of our population here is members of the Latinx community. Currently, you have to request that any specific document is translated into or offered in a different mode than the standard, and I think it would be a meaningful step in the right direction to offer all of that with multilingual options.
Thanks. Where do you stand in the debate to defund the police? Would you support transferring some city funds from cops to social services, for example?
I would support transferring funds and diversifying the capacities of what we consider law enforcement to other things that aren't, other offices that aren't directly armed law enforcement officers. I think expanding our social programs is definitely it's a more proactive step in combating crime and other law enforcement capabilities. If we can prevent things from happening before it even becomes a criminal issue by providing the support that our communities need, I think we can reduce the need to call upon armed cops to show up to situations that are probably not best handled by someone with a gun. I think defunding the police is probably not the best nomenclature, because it's more of reallocating the police. Making sure that people are addressing situations with the proper handling, as opposed to always sending a monomodal response, is something that we need to definitely work on.
Thanks. So moving on to the topic of growth in the city of Bend, this is a big topic for our city and continues to just be talked about a lot. What do you see as the top two challenges facing Bend in the respect of growth, and what do you propose to deal with? How do you propose to deal with these identified challenges?
I would say that ensuring that our transportation system can handle the growth that we will see, and making sure that the people who are coming here and or being born here have adequate housing. I think that diversifying our transportation solutions, mainly expanding our transit and biking/walking options, and ensuring that those are safe and effective and efficient, is one step that we need to take to ensure that we can actually move those people around so they can get to their jobs and get back to their home and get to wherever they need to be around town in a safe and effective manner. And to ensure that affordable housing is actually available to all the people that live here. I think we need to implement rent control. I think we need to make sure that we have a living minimum wage here so that the people that work here can live here. Currently, our growth issues are expanding out into Redmond and Prineville and Lapine, and I think we need to make sure that what we have here is improved so that we're not just shuffling our issues off to a different city. I don't think that's sustainable in the long run, and I think we need to ensure that, again, the people that work here can live here. Rent control and living minimum wage requirements are certainly things I want to push very hard for to ensure that those people can live here.
So the state of Oregon passed now has some rent control measures in place that have happened over the last few years. So what would you do to expand upon that in the city realm?
I think tying those to what people are making around here is something that would be more beneficial.
In the sense of like a cap on rent prices?
Yes, capping rent onto something that is more localized to Central Oregon as opposed to the Oregon as a whole. Currently, I don't think it does enough to do that, as is evidenced by the vast amount of people being pushed out of Bend to Redmond and Prineville. The fact that 40% of our population in Bend rents means that this is definitely an important issue, especially with the pandemic and all the other financial things that are currently occurring. If you cannot be certain that you're going to pay your rent, and the state stops what they're doing currently of preventing evictions, if that stops, then suddenly a large portion of the population may not be secure in their housing. And I think if we actually had rent control measures and better living wage stuff, and those were tied such that the people that were renting could continue to stay in their home and actually build the wealth required to be secure even in times of distress, I think that that would go a long way in housing the people that live here.
So in terms of living wage, are you proposing like a citywide minimum wage standard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great, thanks. So you mentioned affordable housing. That's been an issue for as long as most people can remember in Bend. And yet the programs that are in place can't keep up with the demand. Recognizing that the city of Bend has done quite a few things in that arena, what concrete actions would you take to address housing for low and middle income wage earners in Bend? And I understand you might have touched on some of that, so you can double up or repeat if you'd like.
I think also we need to have smart use of the land to ensure that low-income housing is constructed. I think the possibility of offering incentives tax-wise to ensure that people are building that and make sure that that is competitive with just building a single-family home is something we need to do. I know currently we're establishing more low-income, high-density housing over near Empire on that road extension. I think that's a step in the right direction, ensuring that people are, that housing is available for people to actually occupy. And I think living minimum wage and rent control are necessary steps to ensure that those people can continue to maintain a lifestyle here where their housing is affordable.
So hundreds of people, meanwhile, living in encampments and homeless camps or out of their cars in or around Bend. It's it's a big issue of concern for many Bend voters. What's your take on the city allocating resources in the way of land or money for a homeless camp?
I think that it's a necessary step because currently we don't have the infrastructure to house those people in an effective way because the rent situation here has gotten out of control. Additionally, mental health is a large crisis in Central Oregon, as has been demonstrated by federal grants we have received for mental health care. I think reallocating the police and expanding not specifically their duties, but the capabilities that would fall under the funding that is getting currently, to actually establish mental health care and social workers that would be able to take care of the mental health issues that are frequent among the homeless population here. I think caring for that and ensuring that they have affordable housing are two steps that we can do to ameliorate the issue that we're facing with that. but I think allocating funds in the short term to actually establish housing and sheltering those people currently, I think that's definitely a step in the right direction. I know the city was debating that at the yesterday's council meeting, and I think that expanding that and making sure that the facilities that are already in place that serve that in some sort of capacity are able to expand their capacity to better meet the need, the growing need that we're seeing there. I think that's a very good thing that they're doing right there.
Mm-hmm. So I spoke with another counselor earlier today, and they mentioned just not having a lot of resources in terms of money to put toward a camp.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that a sitting counselor has probably more institutional knowledge around that. How would you get up to speed, and what have you done thus far in the sense of trying to understand the funding mechanisms in place and what's possible?
I've been keeping up on how they're funding a lot of the stuff and reading through all of the notes on the resolutions that they're both proposing and have passed. Personally, I think that we could expand some of the taxes that we're facing on specifically hotels and short-term rentals, because the tourism is, once this is resolved to some degree, the tourism industry is not going to be impacted as we've seen during this time. It's still been going strong, which I'm not sure is a great thing considering the health impacts of that, but having that extra income from those sources, because that's bringing money directly from outside of our city into our city and bringing it into a capacity that can be expended towards bettering our city, I think that's a necessary step.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of follow-ups I'd like to ask about negotiating with hoteliers about that, and even some restrictions around the state, restrictions around allocation of those resources.
Mm-hmm.
Any quick comments on either one of those topics?
It's definitely a contentious topic, as again, this is a large portion of our economy, but I think I want to work the best that I can to ensure that those are devoted back to our community.
Thanks. Do you believe that city council members, as well as people serving on various committees for the city, should be paid a living wage?
I think that compensating people adequately for the time and allowing people to free up more of their time because they're being compensated, I think allowing that to be expanded would be beneficial, because that means that people will, again, have more time and freedom to actually better research and better address the topics that are required of them. I think that certainly it's possibly not having this just as someone's entire job is probably not the best course of action, but I do think that people should be adequately compensated for the time so that they can actually devote enough of their time to be thoroughly educated on the topics that they're addressing.
Okay. So we're getting to the end of our time. I have one last question before I just going to open it up to you mm-hmm. to mention anything we didn't mention, and just tell people why they should vote for you. So my last question is, name one critique of the current city council and describe what you would do differently.
I think that one of the councilors on the current council is taking advantage of the position that they're in of not knowing that they're not going to run again to be controversial in their opinions and just stir up and make it less. They're not respecting the duty of a councilor. They're not serving that in a capacity. They're not serving their community, and they're not listening to that community, and they're not respecting the other councilors and the people that they represent. And I think that a level-headed response to something you don't agree with is necessary on our council, and I don't think that some of the councilors up there are currently providing that. They're being contrarian and I don't think that's a good thing for our city council to have.
Great. So now I just want to give you an opportunity to bring up anything I didn't talk about, and also tell our people watching why they should vote for you.
I don't think we've covered any or missed any major things that I want to address, but I would like to say I am literally always open to answering questions. I will respond to any and all questions, whether or not I agree with it. I will make sure that is heard and represented on the council. I want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, especially the people that don't have the time to go out and make themselves heard on the council. The working people here, especially with the pandemic going on, it's very difficult to make sure that you have enough free time to go out and say, I want this to happen on the council. So I personally want to try and reach out to as many people as possible and make sure that their voices are heard on the city level. I don't think that that's happened a lot. The negative response to some of the actions that our councilors have taken and the outcry that has been presented at some of the meetings has certainly highlighted that the councilors are not listening enough. They are not representing their community. I think the fact that one of the candidate that is incumbent in the seat that I'm running for was appointed, and that was also a contentious issue. Again, I don't think that's allowing the people to be represented properly at the city council level. Personally, I would like to see the appointment process possibly reformed. Currently, it's just an appointment process, but I think a temporary appointment process until a special election could be held might be a better alternative to that. So just an interim counselor as opposed to appointing someone permanently to that position might be a better fit than our current method for filling vacancies.
Thanks. Anything else you want to add before we finish up?
I don't think so.
Just want to thank you for participating in our democracy and for your time and your commitment to our city.
Thank you for allowing me to say my bit.
Thanks.